You're in the water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the nonprofit news outlet that explores solutions for sustainability in water. I am the host, Travis Loop, and I am delighted to be doing this episode. This is In the Newsroom with Ian James of the Los Angeles Times, and I have followed his water and climate reporting for many years, including before he was at the LA Times. So, Ian, I'm very happy to have you on for a conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Travis. And I really enjoy your podcast as well and find it really valuable.
Great. So before we dive into the story that I want to talk about, which is about the idea of a day zero for California, I'm just curious how you keep up with all of the water news in the state and how you kind of sort through what stories to actually follow and put out there. Because as you know better than anyone, there is so much happening in the Golden State when it comes to water.
There certainly is a lot going on. I don't know that there is really a system. All I can really say is that I try to ferret out information that matters for the public and think about some of the big decisions that are being made in California water, the trends, how people are affected, and just try to stay on top of it.
That's it. It's a ton. And I'm sure you've got a lot of inbound suggestions for stories and everyone keeping you, pitching you things and letting you know what's going on. And then you have your own radar up and you've got colleagues and editors and everyone it's this triangulation of information coming in, right?
That it is, yes.
The big story I want to talk to you about, and I really encourage people to go read it, is California prepared to avoid a day zero water crisis? And instead of picking a lot of your different stories and kind of running through them, I wanted to talk about this one because I feel it really hits on so many of, if not all of, the major water issues that are kind of on California's plate. Could you summarize that story and why this was the moment to write something like this?
Yes, this was actually a larger initiative in our newsroom to look at the future of Los Angeles and Southern California. And my editors talked to me about doing a piece about the future of water in Southern California. And there's so much to say on that topic, but I decided to focus around the possibility that someday, or the fear, the concern that this region might face something like a day zero water crisis, like what happened in 2018 in Cape Town, South Africa. There have been other cities more recently, Tehran in Iran, Mexico City, that have had their own major water crises. And California also, from 2020 to 2022, went through a severe drought, and there were parts of Southern California that needed to deal with major water cutbacks to deal with shortages at that time. And so the question that I wanted to look at was, how is the region preparing for this possibility? And also along the way, share information about how much of Southern California's water comes from where currently, and how might that mix change in the future?
Yeah, that day zero scenario in Cape Town really got global headlines because they were headed towards running out of water. That's basically what that day zero means. That is the day we are out of water. I also feel like your story comes at a time when there's a lot of decisions being made about water management and water infrastructure in California. There's just so many things happening, so many big pieces, and I want to go through a lot of those. I've had the fortune to be out there a number of times over the past couple of years and see some of these stories up close and personal. So this idea of Southern California's water portfolio, could you kind of describe right now where Southern California gets its water from?
Yes, right now, Southern California gets about half its water from imported sources. They're coming from hundreds of miles away, comes from the Colorado River, from the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta, and from the Eastern Sierra. And so these aqueduct systems that were built either in the early 20th century or the middle of the 20th century, provide about half the region's water. Then there also are local sources, including groundwater, some of which is replenished with imported water or recycled wastewater. And then there is also recycled wastewater, some local stormwater that's captured, and a tiny amount of desalinated seawater, as well as some treated brackish water. So it's a mix of sources traditionally pretty heavily reliant on water imported from elsewhere. And so one of the big discussions that's happening, one of the debates really, is over how should Southern California look in the future? Should it continue to rely this much on imported water, or should it turn more to developing local sources, such as recycling more of the wastewater, capturing more of the water that during big storms comes rushing through in the LA River and other rivers?
I think everybody knows those imported sources are increasingly vulnerable, or they're reducing in some way, right? The snowpack in the California mountains and the Sierra Nevadas, right? Climate change is really affecting that, and a lot of times lessening that snowpack, lessening that snowmelt, lessening the water that's available. The Colorado River, again, global headlines around that basin and the aridification and kind of the jostling for water among the different states. So that's vulnerable. And then that delta, there's issues there too, which we can follow up on. What's the infrastructure look like? Should they bring more from that? So I guess the idea is like we need to diversify our portfolio. Is that the thinking that's kind of among the water managers right now?
I think there's a consensus around that idea that I've heard from many water managers. Yes. And of course, climate change and all this looms large because the effects are being seen on the Colorado River in terms of the quarter century now of mostly extremely dry years, and the effects on California's snowpack, and the way that our system is built to catch a lot of that snowpack in reservoirs and move it, and the timing of runoff is changing. The average snowpack is decreasing and projected to decrease further. So, one point that stood out in my reporting was talking to John Matthews from the Alliance of Global Water Adaptation, who, as he put it, said that there was all this investment in the early 20th century to build California's massive water systems that support a major economy. And now we're headed for a very different climate, and it calls for major investments to change for what's coming toward us. And that also requires planning for situations more extreme than anything we've seen in history before, as far as extreme, long-lasting dry periods.
They're really thinking about worst case scenarios in a way, right? Like the future with climate change is very unpredictable. We don't know how bad this is going to get and what the impacts will be like. So we need to really bolster our supplies and our infrastructure. That's also an interesting point about it's been maybe 100 years, right, since California has really invested in setting up its kind of water management system. And it's time to modernize that and change that. The dollar amounts are staggering to me, right? You've got what, 20 billion for the Delta tunnel is like one price tag. You've got all these $billion projects for water recycling happening in Southern California and throughout the state. I'm not sure what else is out there, but the price tag is big. What's the take on that?
Well, what I've heard from talking with those who are in charge at the Metropolitan Water District is that costs are a major consideration, and it seems unlikely that they will be able to invest in all these things that are being touted as potential solutions at once. And so the question becomes also how to keep water from becoming too unaffordable at the same time as the region invests in some big projects that can make a difference. And the Metropolitan Water District, which delivers water for about 19 million people, about half the state, has a new climate plan. And one of the concepts they have in there is preparing for deep uncertainty. And so looking at various severe extreme scenarios and planning out how the region can be better prepared. And part of that is by identifying new reliable sources of water to make up for some of the reduced reliability that we're already starting to see.
Mm. The water recycling, to me, is one of the most exciting endeavors that's underway. It seems very effective and efficient in a lot of different ways, including from a cost perspective. It makes just so much sense to clean water and use it again rather than bring it from hundreds of miles away. You're familiar with what LA proper is doing, what the Southern California Water District is doing, what San Diego is doing. I mean, like I said, there's billions of dollars of projects that are going to create giant supplies of that's local water. So it's always interesting to see them like, okay, plus we're going to look at this Delta tunnel, plus we're going to look at this, plus we're going to look at that. But you're saying that's still all a developing matrix very much, right?
Right. There are big decisions ahead for the 38-member board of the Metropolitan Water District. They should be deciding within a year or two about whether they will invest in the Delta Tunnel. And by that point, probably will have a more solid cost estimate as to what it would mean for the region and its ratepayers to invest in the project. The Delta Conveyance Project is the formal name. And then there are other projects that are in the pipeline, such as Sites Reservoir in Northern California, which would be the first big reservoir project in a number of years. Other costs there. A number of leaders of the Metropolitan Water District are sounding quite committed about building Pure Water Southern California, this big water recycling project. And they have support from the federal government. During the last administration, they received some federal support. And then also there's interest among other states as well, Arizona, for instance, in helping to support this project with some funding, and then perhaps finding ways to share water in the future, especially as the Colorado River faces these severe shortages.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible that Arizona needs that water from the Colorado River so badly. And they're concerned about even having potentially another access to water via this recycled water in the Southern California area. They're willing to invest in infrastructure in the greater LA area to recycle water. And that speaks volumes to the situation. You've referenced the price tags, as have I, and ratepayers and customers. I mean, when you're talking about tens of billions of dollars, it does seem like that's going to have to trickle down in some way to the people of California. But I read something incredible in your story about them trying to really minimize that, the cost on taxpayers. Further thoughts on that or info on that?
I think what stands out in all this is that these are really big price tag projects. And so it's something that the members of this board on this water district, who are appointed by city leaders, are going to be watching closely. I mean, if they are, if the cost becomes so high that they need to significantly raise the amount that they charge to retail water suppliers like the cities that get the water and deliver it to customers, then could be a significant financial hit. And then also the water costs they translate into property taxes. And so part of the costs could end up there. But there are real concerns about affordability of water in making these types of big investments. And I think it's something that is going to be talked about more in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I live in North Carolina where we are pretty water rich. And when I talk to California colleagues and friends, my bills pale in comparison to theirs already. So it's something to watch for sure. The Delta Conveyance Project, we've referenced it a bunch, but could you kind of summarize what that is and where that project stands right now?
Yes, it's going through multiple processes right now. It is a plan for a 45-mile tunnel that would create a new route for water beneath the Delta and send it toward the pumps of the State Water Project on the south side of the Delta. It would take in the water on the Sacramento River. And so it would be a bypass under the Delta to create that route for water. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom and the state described this as a way to address climate change and to make up for some of the lost reliability that they're projecting in the State Water Project over the next 20 or so years. And opponents of the project are concerned about the effects on the Delta, which is already struggling in terms of its fish species, its environment. And then there are also cost concerns. This state, the latest state estimate is $20 billion. There are other estimates that are much higher. And some of the opponents of the project are really zeroing in on that point and saying, does Southern California really want to invest this much in a project for the amount of water that they may get? And there's debate about that too, how much water it may deliver. So it's a hot topic and one that will continue to be argued over in multiple processes, one of which is the State Water Resources Control Board is now considering a change in the water right to change the point of diversion. So that's one of the processes that's ongoing. And then at the same time, Governor Newsom is seeking to fast track the process with some legislative changes, which also are very controversial and are being fought by legislators from the Delta region.
A lot of different issues here. I mean, I know Newsom has really been pushing this and wanting changes and kind of commitment before the end of his time as governor. It seems like a bit of a legacy project that he'd like to be able to chalk up, and also something he views as important for sure. When you talk about going under the Delta and building a tunnel and piping, that's an incredible feat of engineering, right? So you can see why that price tag is that staggering. Speaking of the price tag, we know how construction costs go. By the time something gets permitted and they start building, I'm sure it would be much, much more. The environmental concerns is one I'd like to understand better. So folks are worried about taking more water out of the Sacramento River and out of the Delta and what that would do to the environment and wildlife.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the Delta is this amazing ecosystem. It supports species like salmon, which, some of which have been fished commercially, but a number of which have also been declining significantly. And the last 3 years, the commercial fishing season has been canceled because of low numbers. And part of that is the drought. Part of it is also related to water management decisions. And then there are other species that are struggling. Delta smelt, longfin smelt among them. And some of the other environmental concerns in the Delta are that when it's a dry period, there can be harmful algae blooms, which turn the water green and make it a health issue for people and wildlife. And so there are multiple overlapping concerns about the health of the Delta. I think there is widespread consensus among scientists that it is struggling. It's an ecosystem that's facing a number of pressures already. And so the fishing groups, the environmental groups have spoken out strongly in opposition to the tunnel plan because they are concerned that it would worsen the situation. Now, in the state's on the opposite side of that and saying that, the way it's built will be okay for the environment. So that's one of the points that's being argued about in these public meetings.
Some water from the Delta currently and under this conveyance project go toward agriculture in California.
Yes.
It wouldn't be just for municipal and commercial use in Southern California. It would also be an added source for agriculture.
That's true. For agriculture in parts of the valley that receive State Water Project water, and if those agricultural water suppliers decide to sign on and support it financially. The Metropolitan Water District is sort of the make or break group
Mm.
of water suppliers, that one wholesale entity, because I don't have the exact number, but Metropolitan's share would be about half the water, so half the cost. So their decision on whether to ultimately fund it
Mm.
will be pivotal.
Yeah. A whole other story is the water stress on agriculture in California. It is big, big, big business. It's part of the culture. But the changing water situation, the hydrology, the overpumping of groundwater has all really put strain on farms. And, to the point where land might have to or is being taken out of production, even just because of water reasons. So that's almost like this whole other big piece, right? Of like, will California's ag community hit a day zero for water? And how does all this factor in for them? It's very, very interesting.
That's right. And it's important to keep that in perspective, as we're talking about all the urban water use, the agricultural water use remains the largest share of where California's water goes and where water goes in the Southwest. And so decisions about agriculture are critical. And large portions of the Central Valley groundwater has been pumped at high rates excessively for years. And so water levels have been declining. California is working toward implementing the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which sets goals for combating the declines and addressing the problem. But still, it continues to be a big challenge. And recently, what I'm hearing from some of the agricultural water districts is a big focus on, and this is not entirely new, but this is how they're looking at the situation, is really focusing on surface water and how they can get as much surface water as possible to areas that are in a water deficit.
Mm.
And some
Interesting.
of them are facing pretty significant requirements to begin to address that water deficit and bring their groundwater basins into more of a balance. It's
Yeah.
slow. It's a slow process, but that's what they're seeing in the coming years.
I know that California was experimenting with or piloting this multi-benefit land repurposing where they have a fund to help farmers or farms convert part of their land to be able to capture rain and surface water and recharge groundwater and provide habitat for wildlife, for recreation for people. And I think there was like some funding, there was an attempt to get more funding. Do you know where that whole piece stands? Because that's, I think, part of the water puzzle.
Yes, there's certainly interest in that and a focus on it at the state level, with the idea that uh, the need to address groundwater overdraft in these areas with serious overdraft problems is going to require taking some land out of production in the long run. And so there is a focus on looking at how land can be repurposed to other uses, solar energy, for instance, wildlife habitat areas. But of course, all that does require funding. And the other the
Here
other
we are
big
again at
piece,
that magic money issue, right? If we just had
yeah,
infinite money, we could solve it all. Yeah.
the other big piece that you mentioned there is groundwater replenishment and managed aquifer recharge, which is also a big priority area for the state government and for a number of local agencies to find ways of getting more water into the ground.
Hmm. Uh, Side question, every time I see pictures of the State Water Project or canals, I just see them on a nice sunny day and I can almost see that water, evaporating up into the sky a little bit. And I can see a place where solar panels would provide shade and energy. How come there's not more of attempt to do that type of thing?
No, I think that's a good point. And I think a lot of people have that thought and wonder, why don't we just do this? I mean, it is being tried out in Arizona. There's a
Yeah.
a program in the Central Valley looking at doing that, and I believe is still getting started. It seems like some of the people who are in charge of the water system are amenable. So maybe it's just a question of costs and political will to do it. Certainly evaporation is one of the issues. It's one of the places the water goes. So it could help if it's cost effective. I hear that again and again from water managers is it going to be cost effective? If they're looking at desalination in Southern California, for instance, that's one of their top questions. If they're studying a concept, which they are right now, looking at this idea of a technology that would be a water farm several miles off the coast of Malibu, how much is that going to cost ultimately? That's their big question. And so that just requires more study.
Yeah. Water is heavy and moving it is therefore expensive. One of the last kind of questions that came from your story is the idea of how much local water can come from conservation and efficiency. I know you talked to the Pacific Institute and they've done some research and number crunching, and I was pretty staggered to read their predictions of how much water, the acre feet that could be conserved through conservation and efficiency, and how much that would offset the need for more. It seems like a big lift to drive all that. So just kind of wondering on, that part of your story and what the thinking is there.
The Pacific Institute took a deep look at this question in a 2022 report called Untapped Potential, I believe is the name. And really interesting to see that there is big water saving potential in Southern California through conservation and efficiency improvements. This is a range of practices, some of which include switching out lawns for more climate appropriate landscaping that can save significant amounts of water. But it's also things like upgrading appliances to more efficient appliances. So they looked at all that in detail and they found big water saving potential. The way the experts at the Pacific Institute describe it is that conservation is the most economical way of generating new water supplies. So I think that's one other piece of the pie that a lot of people are considering as they're looking at the future of water in California and in the West is, how much more can we squeeze out of what we have to live within our means?
It does make sense, I guess, because if you look at some big cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix, even, they have boomed and grown, but their water consumption has gone down at the same time, largely through a lot of those kind of measures, really intensive conservation, efficiency, native landscaping, et cetera, et cetera. So that is untapped, as the Pacific Institute folks say. Last question, I'll take you back to the first question and see what your answer is. Is Southern California prepared to avoid a day zero water crisis?
I would say no, but it's being worked on. And it is important to mention that there is this whole effort around climate adaptation planning.
Yes.
And so I think from some of the outside experts I've talked to, they are saying that they see hopeful signs that Southern California is really taking stock of these challenges and looking at what needs to be done to prepare for some of these worst case scenarios.
Yeah. And I think the answer to the question might be different 25 years from now, based on, I think, a lot of these tangible, impactful efforts to diversify that portfolio. It seems like there is a lot of good stuff happening. Again, Ian, I was really glad to have you on the podcast finally. I encourage everybody to follow your work for the LA Times. Just good stuff constantly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you want to support Waterloop's ongoing exploration of water solutions, subscribe on YouTube, rate and review the podcast on Spotify and Apple, follow us on social media at The Waterloop, and sign up for email updates at waterloop.org. Until next time, be water, my friends.
You're in the Waterloop. You're in the water loop.